Welcome back. I'm talking to Andrew Johnson about cold fusion, or the preferred name, which is low energy nuclear reaction. And Eugene Mallove basically exposed the fact that they were trying to cover up this technology. We've got a clip of Eugene Mallove speaking in 2004, because Mallove was murdered in 2004, and you believe it was linked to his work in this field, Andrew?
Yeah, I do, because I heard at the time that he had sort of rallied together a few people regarding some of these alternative energy technologies, you know, the free energy technologies, like cold fusion. There are others. For example, he started to investigate what are called orgone accumulators, which was derived from the research of Wilhelm Reich. He'd looked at those as possibly producing a source of energy too, and he'd managed to rally together a few people to, I think, to make a presentation to the US Congress, as I understand it. And it was around that time that he was murdered, apparently in a botched burglary. That was the official story, that he was at I think his mother's house. I think his mother had recently died or had moved, and he was sorting out the house, and then there was a burglary, and he was then assaulted and killed at that time. That was in 2004.
Right. Well, before we listen to this clip, just to touch on why these technologies, if they exist, aren't on the shelves of our shops. And we were discussing this off camera, that if you can create excess energy in a beaker in your kitchen, okay, at some point that has to be turned into something which is sellable and marketable, a proper all-singing, all-dancing device that we can all use. Now that requires a lot of investment, and it requires help from industry. And you think that that's when these things get flagged up?
Right, I do, because you know, you can produce a free energy device, I think, quite easily. If you go and look at some of these YouTube videos about things like Joule thief-based devices, Bedini motor derivatives, which we're going to probably talk about.
We're going to talk about some more next week as well, some more alleged free energy devices.
And I think it is fairly easy to get out more energy than you put in, you know, at least in small amounts. But to make these solutions engineerable and to scale them up into a generator, you can't really do that in your garage. And in this talk that I'm doing in Derby, I'll explore why I'm saying this a little bit more. But you need, for example, to have a factory. So to build a factory, you need money, you need investment. And so you have to go to a bank or a group of people. And you'll probably want to get scientific consultation, as a lot of people have tried to do. And they'll say, well, look, my device works, but I know you're not going to believe me, so I need to get XYZ professor this, professor that, to come and write a report about it, so that, you know, you'll understand that this is real. And at any of those points, people can be tripped up. They can send in the bad guys, so to speak. They can send in lawyers.
Get hijacked.
And it gets hijacked. You get your workshop burnt down, and this has happened time and time again.
Yeah, and there are a few examples of that, which we'll cover next week. Now, there's also the patenting aspect.
Exactly.
Because most people, if they produce excess energy in a beaker in their kitchen, they're going to run and get a patent. So that is then flagged up. Yeah.
Right. And I'd heard from another source. I think it was Paula Violette or Tom Valone, I can't remember which of them said this, but whenever you get a free energy patent coming into their patent office, because they were involved in handling patents, it was regarded as a matter of national security, according to them.
Okay, well, let's have a listen to this clip with Eugene Mallove, who was murdered 3 months after this audio clip?
Yeah, it was about 3 months, yeah.
Okay.
The academic government complex, not the military-industrial complex, as much as the academic government complex, is against new scientific ideas that threaten the foundations of their work. And they, no matter how many papers are published, I don't care whether they're on the internet or not on the internet or where they are, the establishment academic government complex is brain dead.
I mean, why can't they open their arms and say, this is exciting, let's try it, let's experiment, and let's jump in it?
Well, it's remarkable. I must tell you, George, 15 years, almost 15 years now, after that fateful day of March 23rd, 1989, I continue to evolve in my understanding of the well, the emotional and psychological and intellectual armoring, to borrow a term from the famous Wilhelm Reich, that scientists have. It's astounding. One physicist at MIT, whose name is Dr. Hermann Feshbach, one of the world's foremost nuclear physics people. Now he's deceased. But at MIT, as I was finishing up my time there as a senior person in the MIT news office as a science journalist, he had played a role in getting rid of a major article that was of mine that was going to appear in the MIT magazine, a very influential magazine called Technology Review. It's on newsstands all over the place. He said to me, "I've had 50 years of experience in nuclear physics, and I know what's possible and what's not possible." And then that was it. That was his total statement, which I would cite forever as a statement, a kind of statement that should never come out of the mouth of any person who considers themselves a legitimate scientist. They're not a scientist if they say, based on previous knowledge and theory that I have, I know for all time what is possible and what's not. That's obviously crazy.
Okay, so this Hermann Feshbach is basically telling Eugene Mallove that he's not going to find any new science in this technology, which goes against the principles of science. Science is all about finding new discoveries, and when new phenomenon is found that can't be explained, trying to document it and bring new laws. So he's basically blocking them.
Right. I mean, he was acting as part of the energy cover-up, Mallove's boss, or this professor guy that Mallove was answered to, essentially. So it was at that point, or around that time, or soon afterwards, that Mallove left Massachusetts Institute of Technology because he realised he couldn't. He knew that this technology was real and that it worked, and he knew he wasn't going to get anywhere with this corrupt organisation which had tried to suppress it.
So he turned his back on probably a fairly lucrative academic career because he wasn't allowed to talk about or research these subjects.
Right. I mean, to him it was one of the most important scientific discoveries that was around at that time, and he realised it was being censored.
Right. After leaving MIT, because he was upset at not being able to follow his lines of research, what was he doing between then and when he was murdered in 2004?
He set up a group called I think they call it the New Energy Foundation, and he got together with a few other people. One of which I think was Steve Crivet. I think had some involvement with that, trying to explore the sorts of things we're talking about today. These energy devices, and trying to get research funded for them. With a few tens of thousands of dollars. And his argument was basically that he knew how much they were spending on the hot fusion program, and he knew fairly well what Pons and Fleischmann had been doing, and he looked at the maths in terms of the finances and says, look, we're spending 20 million on a big rig for a hot fusion reactor, and all Pons and Fleischmann are needing is maybe $100,000. So if I can raise those sorts of funds for those sorts of experiments, I think we can make some progress and bring these things into fruition more, and that I think was his rationale behind the New Energy Foundation. Right.
And you actually think that, because you think there is a connection with 9/11 and cold fusion.
Correct.
That the reaction that's happening in cold fusion was something similar to when the towers were basically dissolved into dust.
Something like that. There's some type of nuclear process which has some similarities, and one of the reasons for that is, again, going back to the transmutation of elements. And we've mentioned this. We've seen this in John Hutchison's experiments. He's had stainless steel bars which appear to have showed some copper compounds on the surface after his experiments. So he also appears to have found transmutation, and so that's a link. It's low energy. John Hutchison doesn't use a lot of energy in his experiments. Same as cold fusion. You only use maybe a maximum of something like 100 watts in some of these cold fusion experiments. Not very much at all.
Did they get any glow or light emitted in any of the cold fusion experiments?
Yes, they did. You can see there are some videos of this on YouTube of cold fusion reactions. Some of them, when they get them going, they produce you know, it looks like a sort of
Fluorescence effect.
well, kind of, yeah, but they do. Some of them do produce light, quite a lot of light in the reactor cell.
So one of the scientists who was used to pour cold water on the whole cold fusion thing was this Dr. Steve Jones, Dr.
Correct.
Stephen E. Jones, and he was also used as part of what we believe is a bogus 9/11 truth movement
Right,
to say that there
yeah.
were bombs in the building.
The NIST reports, which were the technical scientific reports about the destruction of the World Trade Center, were produced and released to the public in August 2005. And it was just around that time that Stephen E. Jones appeared on the scene to talk about thermite, and thermite being used as one of the causative agents, which of course has nothing to do with that. And that's dealt with in Dr. Wood's book, and it's dealt with in my book. So and also, essentially, Jones was doing what we call a limited hangout. In other words, he was disagreeing with the official story of 9/11. He didn't say it was hijackers and planes crashing into the buildings that destroyed them. And he was also disagreeing with the official science of fusion reactions. In other words, Jones performed experiments to produce a fusion effect with low energy reactions, but it was totally different to Pons and Fleischmann's work. Right. He used this muon catalyzed cold fusion process. So he wasn't outright lying about it, but he knew that his process really could, you know, it was never going to be engineerable. Right. And you could never sort of engineer this into a device because you'd need this, like a neutron generator or something, you know, to make it work properly. And this would be a huge piece of equipment that you couldn't easily miniaturize. And he knew that, so he knew that it was safe for him to talk about fusion, cold fusion being real. Right. But you know, then he would say no, he couldn't do anything with it. And we have this other clip that we're going to play of him, where he says.
So what year is this clip? This is Stephen E. Jones.
This is in 1989.
So this is not long after the Pons and Fleischmann claim came out.
Correct.
Okay.
And he basically says, "Are we going to be able to use this as a source of cheap energy?" And he says, "No, we're not. Read my lips at the back. We're not going to get cheap energy from this." Okay,
let's have a listen to this clip then.
Is it a shortcut to fusion energy? I don't want to disappoint anyone. I think I'll put my read my lips answer here, and then I'll carry on. I think that'll become clear why I'm saying that. Can you read my lips on that back in the back? It says no. Energy is a long way off. That's why I say no. This is our result. It's just way off.
So what do you read from that, Andrew? That he's blocking it without looking at the evidence? Or?
Well, he's giving it an air of credibility by saying, well, look, you know, I've done my own experiments in cold fusion, and this is what I found out about it. So I think the phenomenon is real, but I don't agree with what Pons and Fleischmann has found. You know, and he wouldn't sort of say they were lying. He just said, well, I think they need to perform their experiment a few more times, and they'll realise that this energy is not what they say it is. You know, that he wouldn't have said that specifically, but that's the type of thing that he was trying to encourage. And you can read about more about Stephen E. Jones in Mallove's book, Fire from Ice, that I'd already mentioned, and Stephen E. Jones is mentioned on 100 pages of that, and I may have said that last time I was on, but this is a hugely important connection for people to make and research into, I think, because we are getting led directly to the perpetrators of the events of 9/11 because they have this technology and there is some energy relation.
Right. Now, Fleischmann actually passed away not long ago, Andrew. Is there any suspicion over that death? He was quite old, though.
Fleischmann, he was 84 years old. He recently passed. He did live in England. I think he lived in Oxfordshire somewhere. And he did die of natural causes, as I understand it. I forget the exact cause of death, but yeah, it was literally in the last month that he's passed away.
What about Pons then?
Well, Pons, I mean, he's always seemed to have kept a low profile. He doesn't seem to have given that many interviews, so I don't know a great deal about Pons. It's mainly Fleischmann that seemed to have spoken out. And you know, if you listen to some of Fleischmann's interviews, you can see that he knew that his reputation was going to be trashed by putting this out, and he kind of watched this happen, and he almost became a broken man over this because of what happened to his reputation.
So if, let's say that technology was turned into something that could be used in everyday life, what form would that take then? Would they heat the cocktail up and then use that to fire a boiler and to turn a turbine, or do you know how it would be envisioned how they could get that heat energy into something that's useful like electricity?
I would imagine they would have to have some type of boiler system or something like that to produce electricity from that,
Right.
you know, pressurized gas and so on. I don't think they had anything more exotic than that, where they would directly derive the current from the cold fusion process, or I think they would have had to have some intermediate process. I mean, that just one of the things that was central to the cold fusion debate was calorimetry. This idea where you could, the accuracy of measuring the heat which came out, that was always hotly debated.
Right.
That, you know, you'd need to measure accurately the amount of energy that was put in and the amount of energy which was given out as heat, and that whole sort of topic is calorimetry that you needed to get accurately done.
Now, as we mentioned, this device, it's not an over-unity device, what you would call an over-unity device, because it's alleged that the energy is coming from mass which is being destroyed. Okay?
Right.
But there are other devices which claim to get energy from what's called the quantum vacuum.
Yes.
So from the fabric of space itself, from a vacuum, they're somehow extracting energy. And Nikola Tesla is famous as being the first person who's supposed to have suggested that this could be done.
Right.
And I think some of the devices we're going to discuss next week purport to actually use this 0-point field. But again, this isn't breaking any laws of
No.
you know, the thermodynamics or anything like
No.
that.
No. Essentially, with cold fusion, all that you're saying is that there is a nuclear process going on which hadn't been properly defined. And that was about it.
Right.
You know, it was just a nuclear reaction was happening in circumstances where you wouldn't normally expect it to happen.
Right. All right, Andrew. Well, just remind us about the event that you're going to be speaking about some of these issues at.
Yeah, it's going to be at the Derby YMCA on the 30th of September. Tickets £15 all day. There'll be a cafe on site for people to get a cup of tea and sandwiches and so forth. Limited parking, so you know you might want to just park in the streets nearby and so on. About a mile outside of Derby Centre, so you should be able to get there from the train station. And please come along. Bring a friend who doesn't know about this stuff, and they'll be in for some interesting information, hopefully.
And I'm going to be talking about UFOs, animal abduction, and also mind control, and putting some information about the Raoul Moat incident. But thanks again, Andrew, and
Thank you.
we'll welcome you back next week to talk more about energy. It just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.